There's a couple of things I want to go over here that I found interesting. There's one general and one specific one. Let's switch up that camera. So the first thing I want to talk about is obelisk positioning. So someone actually asked about this in chat, and I have been developing my own thoughts on obelisk positioning over the course of my time playing. I think it's really not obvious. I mean, sometimes people say, oh, positioning isn't a big part of Duelyst, but like, where do you put Ethereal Obelisk on turn 1? I think that's genuinely one of the most interesting questions in the game. Just where do you put Ethereal Obelisk on turn 1? And you can start engaging with this on your first day, because it's a basic card. So, when I'm going first, I pretty much always come down on placing it in front of me. So I'll walk Xerix or whoever 2 squares forward, and then place the Ethereal Obelisk directly in front of him. So between myself and the opponent. And there's a couple of reasons for this. You are slightly less likely to be able to take a mana tile than if you place the obelisk diagonally. But since, mana tiles are fleeting and temporary, if your obelisk survives, you're going to get quite a lot of value out of it anyway. Because if your opponents move near the center at all, you're going to get to hit them with a dervish for free. So the fact that you can't play a 4-drop some of the time is made up for by the fact that often you get to hit them, or more relevantly hit their minions with a dervish. So I'd much rather position the obelisk in a place that allows it to maximize its ability to hit stuff, both immediately on turn 2 and afterwards in the rest of the game. So when you, because obelisks can't move, you kind of have to think 10 turns ahead when you're playing them. And sometimes they just get natural selection and none of it mattered. But an obelisk that's even 1 or 2 squares out of position can be utterly useless. Because it opens you up to bad rolls. Sometimes it won't matter, you'll roll well on the positioning, you get lucky, and then all of a sudden, your slight misplay or maybe, overly conservative positioning or whatever doesn't really matter, because the dervishes end up in the right place anyway. But when it's in the wrong place, you really feel it. Oh, it spawned behind it again and now it can't reach anything. Oh, my opponent's all the way over there and my obelisk is useless. So even when you're playing your turn 1 obelisk, you want to be balancing protecting it against it still being able to attack stuff on turn 6. And so that's why I always play it in the center, because if you play it diagonally, your opponent can skew their fighting towards the other side of the board, across the horizontal split. Meaning you might still be able to hit them, right? You've still got a chance of being able to attack them, but it's lowered. And those times where you fail that roll, where you get it's roughly a 50-50 for it to be able to attack something close to the top of the board, when it's low down. And when you fail those 50-50s a couple turns in a row, you're going to feel that, because you spent a card on the privilege of spawning dervishes in the wrong place. You spent a card and mana. And, there's always the risk that before you get any real value out of it, it might just get killed by a random attacker that had nothing better to do. It might get swept up in an AoE. It might get dispelled. Your obelisks usually have some kind of ticking clock on them, even though they're surprisingly resilient when your opponent doesn't have specific answers. So you do want to be able to get something out of it straight away and later, with the understanding that sometimes you'll get value out of it. Sometimes it'll survive for a couple of turns, and so maximizing its impact in those first few turns is also worthwhile. There's 3 times. Sometimes it dies straight away, sometimes it survives a couple turns, and sometimes it survives for ages. And you want to maximize its impact in all 3. So that's why I always place it in front of me. When you're going second, it's way more complicated. The first condition is, did your opponent play anything? If they played a 2-drop, normally diagonally down, I like to go up in the other direction. I like to move upwards and place the obelisk diagonally above me if my opponent placed their minion diagonally below. The reason for this is, so it's very defensive, it's very conservative, but it lets me at least protect the top mana tile, which means my opponent won't want to go for it, so I can move towards it and play something on it next turn. it gives me a decent amount of control over the middle mana tile as well. Like an obelisk there, any dervish that spawns from that obelisk will be able to attack something on either of the other two mana tiles. The middle one or the top one. I'm trying to think, if I nip into practice mode, and I can just point at tiles, you see what I mean? I even have a Vitruvian deck handy. Sure. Annoyingly, these still have a round timer, but I can at least just mouse over tiles and discuss the different options. So the one I'm talking about right now is here. If my opponent moves forward and plays a unit here, like a random 2/3, Young Silithar or Healing Mystic or whatever. Okay, they played it there. Pretend that's a random 2/3. Obviously, Pyromancer is a very different card, but for the sake of argument, this is a random 2/3. So I want to move down here and place my obelisk there. From here, any dervish spawned can still attack either of these mana tiles. So if your opponent takes them, they have to deal with their unit getting hit by a dervish next turn, unless they also have removal for the dervish. For the obelisk. AKA, they also have natural selection or chromatic cold. That's one option. Another option is to move forward and put it there, whereupon it hasn't taken the middle mana tile, but any dervish spawned will be able to attack the middle mana tile, and you and your obelisk are closer to the center. This one is good if you think your opponent's pressuring you. If they're likely to attack you and come towards you, then you can kind of let them have the run of the board and say, yeah, but when you come towards me, you could use the T2K5 sandbox script that has no turn timer and you're both players. It's okay. I think this one might actually be untimed anyway. I've been here for ages and it hasn't done anything. Oh no, there we go. There's something. So I can move here and play the obelisk there. And that allows me to defend the center of the board and keep my options open for which side the fighting happens on, without actually needing to worry about my obelisk getting attacked. On the flip side, so there are a couple of other different situations. If I have two obelisks, it's often worth, if I have two 2-drop obelisks, it's often worth playing them both in the middle. Your opponent might be able to attack and kill one, using a card to do so, but the other one will almost certainly survive, and you'll have eaten up a lot of the center of the board with these big, 6 health units. They don't counterattack, but they're still quite large, and that makes a reasonable difference. If your opponent doesn't play a unit, so they can't attack you, they need 4 extra damage out of hand. Sometimes it is worth taking the center. Or maybe you can take the center tile and play something in front of it to body block their general from hitting your obelisk. So if you've got 2 units, playing the obelisk in the middle becomes a lot better. Once it's in the middle, it'll have good things to attack for like the whole game. Also, we can't see most of the screen. Oh, it doesn't matter. Here is fine, but I will shrink that down for a greater context. I'm only talking about this half anyway, so I don't think, hopefully you haven't missed anything. So, as you can see, so this is actually an interesting example. So my opponent's, whatever AI doing AI things, it's played something here. This obelisk is now out of position, right? If my opponent decides, well, I'm going to set up my stuff over here, the obelisk can't really defend against that. So if they're putting down ranged units, putting down units with powerful abilities, this obelisk can't affect the board at all. So by making this decision, I have good control over these tiles, but that's it. I can't take this mana tile because I got a bad spawn, and so I'm not going to be able to Blood of Air this turn. As to what I'm going to actually do, I don't know, who cares. Let's just play some stuff. Whatever. Ooh, hello. So my obelisk is still in a decently defended spot. It won't do much for a while, but if I'm looking for like Scion's Third Wish targets, Dunecaster targets, it'll actually do a good job of surviving to provide them. So this game is now actually continuing. Let's ignore that. So to go back, I think of it, there's a couple of main options. Assuming your opponent plays a minion, then you want to either play, I like to either play my obelisk behind me, so move forward and place the obelisk directly behind me, where it contests the middle tile, or move diagonally upwards, or away from the unit basically, and place the obelisk in the same direction from me, so it contests the other 2 mana tiles. The one in the center is good if your opponent's going to be more aggressive. The one on the side is good if the game is likely to be more even, or if you're the aggressor but want to stick your obelisk. Because the one in the middle, the obelisk will be able to cover less ground, to defend, to do less, to counterattack less. But it's good if you know your opponent's going to be running into your face, and you don't want to have to make a decision yet about which side of the board you're going to have to run to. The advantage of playing diagonally is that you stake a bit more claim of territory, but you've kind of pigeonholed yourself into a side of the board, so your opponent can potentially more easily surround you from there if they can deal with your dervishes. Of course, you've got an obelisk, and obelisks are very good when your opponent's trying to approach you. They're kind of at their best then. So there's no really good way to play them on turn 2 aggressively, unless you've got 2 of them, or another unit that you can put in the way. So suppose you're playing something like, you're playing Wind Slicer, right? Wind Slicer is quite good for this. You can play your Wind Slicer and play 2 obelisks around you, behind, defensively, but around you. I don't like playing the obelisk to the side of the mana tile. It puts it further forward, but it exposes it to attacks pretty easily. There is one advantage to playing it. Suppose your opponent plays their unit diagonally below them. If you walk forward 2 and place your unit diagonally, your obelisk diagonally above, your opponent can't attack it with both their unit and their general. So it is actually quite hard for them to remove. The downside is that your obelisk will usually get 1 dervish spawn out and then die, because it's in the middle of everything. And you kind of get the same thing where if you play a unit in the middle as well as an obelisk, that can help a bit more. Or if your opponent didn't play a unit on turn 1, because then maybe they have a 2/3 and you have an obelisk and a 2/3. So they can play a 4-drop, but you've at least got an extra 2-drop to help trade with their 2-drop, help kill their 4-drop. Just get in the way and contest board, contest space. Or if you play 2 obelisks, one of them is not unlikely to die, but you stick the other one and your opponent put time and effort into killing the first, and sometimes they don't have the extra 2 damage, and you get this whole upside of, well, now I have 2 obelisks, and you've done nothing. I've probably won this game. So that has enough of a high upside that it's worth it. But a lot of the time, you only have a Fireblaze obelisk, or you don't have another 2-drop, or even you don't want to play 2 2-drops, you just want to play 1 obelisk defensively and replace the 2-drop to keep your hand large, right? Maybe you don't have that much card draw in your deck. So I think of all the time I've spent playing with obelisks, which is quite often, I've spent a decent amount of time with them, it is quite rare for me to do obelisk plus 2-drop. Either you need 2 obelisks for that, or like you're often in decks like that, your other 2-drop is Dunecaster, which you don't really want to run out on the first turn. Sometimes you have Pax. Pax is alright. In fact, Pax is at its best on turn 1, so obelisk Pax is probably quite good. But usually, much more often, I end up playing them defensively when I'm going second. But I always play them aggressively when I go first. I like playing them in the middle. It contests the most board. It makes kind of the boldest statement. You're sitting there going, this is my obelisk, this is my board. I'm going to play here, and you're going to have to fight me for the center through these dervishes that I'm generating for free.